All right, y'all. So we are now on to our last totalitarian dictator. We're going to talk about the rise of Adolf Hitler. We're going to focus on Hitler from really 1919 into 1938. 1938 is going to be where we cut off. We're not going to do the pathway towards war. We're going to do that part into World War One. But let's go and look. We're talking about the rise of Hitler. If you wanted to pause here and just kind of look at some of these images, really powerful stuff that I found. I mean, again, we just see kind of what Hitler was. But what happens? So Hitler, what was National Socialism? National Socialism was a movement driven by extreme nationalism and Aryanism. Please make sure Aryanism, remember Houston Stewart Chamberlain. In 1920, Hitler, who was a disciple of Aryanism, he lived in Vienna at the height of some parts of the anti-Semitism. He lived in parts of Germany during his youthfulness. Hitler's going to transform. By 1920, coming out of World War One, Hitler did have a medal. He was somewhat historic on the battlefields, not fighting but carrying messages. But in 1920, when he thought he had found his identity and his purpose in the military, but with the German military demilitarizing, he was lost. And as a lost young man, he's going to be drawn into, by 1919, into extremism. And by 1920, not only did he become a member of this German Workers' Party, he's going to transform the German Workers' Party into the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He actually is the one that, from what I understand, identified and designed that swastika's emblem. Not surprising. Remember, Aryanism is this myth. Part of the myth is that Aryans created Indian culture, and the swastika actually is part of the Indian culture, and so he steals it, rebrands it, and it's really again all lies, all myths. And what we see by 1921, here we see a photograph of him, young Adolf Hitler, younger, 1921, and he emerged as the leader of this party. He's really kind of emerged in this position of leadership. He's really embodies the hatefulness of this new party. He embodies the hopelessness of Germany. He really wants to reveal that he alone has a plan of fulfillment. His first major event that he occurs that he has this Munich beer hall push, which is a rebellion. And in November 1923, this is a pretty violent moment. From what I understand, he captured the prime minister of Bavaria. He's kidnapped them by the use of guns. He is on the verge of, they're leading the way. Here you see a photograph of the Nazi military, paramilitary group, a private military group. And in the end, they failed, and Hitler was arrested. And though he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, he only served 9 months for treason. So again, I don't understand how it's only this time period. I mean, he clearly was doing some really whack out stuff here, and yet nothing occurred. It is in prison in which he's going to dictate Mein Kampf to his future secretary Hess. And Mein Kampf is supposed to be my struggle. It's supposed to be his autobiography, but in reality, we're going to talk about what Mein Kampf is in the next page. But Mein Kampf becomes it. He's personifying the struggles of Germany, and he does a really okay job with imagery to pull in attention that his struggles is the German struggles, and the German struggles are his struggles, and that he alone can fix things. And Hitler now becomes this popular right wing hero. And the ideology that comes out of this, Mein Kampf, it is absolute Aryanism. It is absolutely drenched with Houston Stewart Chamberlain's social Darwinism, the idea of the supremacy of the master race, the idea that Jews are the great obstacle to German greatness, that democracy is terrible, we need to get rid of that, and really we need to do these things. And in doing so, he developed this ideology called Lebensraum. Lebensraum is living space. And he argued for Germany to become the great people, the Vogue of the world. They needed to create living space so that they can produce the number of children, the population that can really transform the entire world. And this Lebensraum is all about the eastern borders. It's about Poland. It's about the Ukraine. It's about the western parts of Russia. Really, and it became part of his ideology that it was necessary for the greatness of the Aryan people. And again, later when Stalin says, "Hey, we're friends with Hitler," well, the question is, why did they not read this book? Should have read it. And he created the principle of fear. The Führer principle is the idea that a singular leader it will transform the political, social, and economic systems of Germany. The Führer is clearly attached to the Overman of Nietzsche, the idea that one leader alone can overthrow, and these are just three elements of so many more, but for me they're the three most important elements: Arianism, Lebensraum, and fear. And now, as people begin to read Mein Kampf, this becomes their little Bible, if you will. They believe they could use democracy to destroy democracy. And this is where we're going to see the growth of the Nazis. Hitler promised a national rebirth, and through this rhetoric, he begins to attract lower and middle class voters. And really, when we think about this element, the lower class and the middle class, they're the ones that they're tied to the German nationalism, the age of the nation state. They the laboring classes, you might say, well, why aren't they communists? Well, because communists are workers of the world unite. These guys are still German. They're still blinded by German nationalism. The Aryanism of Kaiser Wilhelm is still completely part of their paradigm. And when the Great Depression really hits, it's no longer just about lower and middle class. That bourgeoisie, fearing a communist revolution, absolutely will shift towards Nazism. And during the peak of this depression, Chancellor Brunings he creates a ton of chaos. He utilizes a constitutional a constitutional power that he had to rule by decree. He completely shut down the Reichstag and ruled through decree. And all of a sudden, it creates this element that the Reichstag is not as important as the leader. I don't think Chancellor Bruning had any other opportunities other than do that, but it set a very dangerous precedent that will be fulfilled by Hitler. And we'll see that later. So people are now disillusioned by Germany. Um, and within the left, the communists and the social democrats absolutely hate each other. They become partisan. When I say partisan, they're going to take up arms against each other in some ways. They're ready. They're never going to unite together because the communists are more Bolshevik minded. Social democrats or the SPDs are revisionists. They're resisting. They want to be civilized, if you will. So by the end of 1932, the Weimar Republic is completely polarized. The electorate called for extreme action. And I wanted to point this is the election of 1932 for the Reichstag. The far right, these are the Nazi seats. So in 1932, the Nazis take up about 30+% of the seats. You can't get more far right than that. Over here, these are the communists. The communists have a pretty good level, right? But then the social democrats. We see that this is the central party. But in the end, look at that division. Even though the Nazis only make up 1/3 of the power, when you think about these different elements are going to define themselves by their differences than their similarities, the Nazis are in a position of power if something happens now. If they can create a moment, things can change and they can seize power. So that's what happens. Here's Hitler's seizure of power. This is him at the outcome of this moment in which he's all excited. People are loving to touch him. I'm not sure why. But in January 1933, as there's more tension, more chaos, the same thing in Germany happened in Italy. Chancellor Bruning, fearful of what Hitler was preaching, believed that Hitler was destabilizing Germany, understood that there were going to be worse months ahead of him. He convinced President Hindenburg to make Hitler the chancellor. I want to point out, Hitler's never won an election. He got shellacked by President Hindenburg in 1932 when Hindenburg ran for president. So Hitler himself has never really won an election within the Weimar Republic. Really important for you to know that. But regardless, he is now positioned as a chancellor. On the eve of the 1933 elections, February 1933, there was a general fear that the Nazis were going to get upended by the communists in this election. So on the eve of the elections, this Reichstag fire occurs. This Reichstag fire occurred, and we're not sure what actually happened. I thinking more on popular historian side, I can't imagine it wasn't the Nazis that did it. But regardless, Hitler, this Reichstag fires occurred on the eve of the election, and Hitler announced it was the communists beginning their revolution. I can't believe it was the communists. They're about to win an election. It seems like they're in a position of power. Why would they go to terrorism? But regardless of that, the German electorate immediately got fearful of the communists, and in the end, allowed for the Nazis to win up to 40% of the seats. Hitler was kind of frustrated. He thought he would win a majority, but he gets at least 40 cents. He still has the plurality. He then works with Hindenburg and says, hey, we need to figure out how to solve this chaos. We're polarized. We're on the verge of revolution, which isn't necessarily wrong, but Hitler's actually part of the tools causing it. Fair enough. But this is when he convinced Hindenburg to pass what we call the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act of 1933 allowed for Hitler to alone rule by decree. Immediately, he passed a law that outlawed the communists and really eventually made every political party except the Nazis illegal. In May 1933, to combat the rise of the left, he formed the German Labor Front, convincing the workers that he represented their interests. Fun fact, the German Labor Front was dominated by the Nazis. All the Nazi leadership was there, and they forbid workers from collective bargaining and forbade them from striking. So now all of a sudden, labor is losing their position, and this German labor front is really centralizing that labor under the German state. And with the Enabling Act, there is no election. The left has no voice, and again, we see this realpolitik that he's utilizing. By the summer of 1933, Hitler had successfully established a single-party dictatorship. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to continue this later.